Hoki mai anō. Welcome back. The government's announced plans to create New Zealand's first ministry for disabled people. Its task, opening up society to the disabled, from jobs to housing, health and education. But will it have the teeth? Joining us now is a lawyer and advocate for the disabled who has fought for a ministry for 40 years. Welcome, Dr. Huhana Hickey, to the program. Thanks for your time. 40 years, why so long?
Well, fighting ever since my father first had several strokes when I was 14, and we got involved through my dad, and just over the years as my disability started progressing, got into the community. But we've been trying for so many years, and the community have been speaking out. I remember as far back as 1988, 1990s, but every minister I spoke to over the years would say, nope, you'll never get a ministry, you'll never get an act, and I just took that as a challenge.
Okay.
And not giving up. I mean,
well, you finally got a result. You finally got a result. How does that feel?
Yes. Great. I'm cautiously optimistic. It's great, but it's got to work. And it has to be different to the existing ministries we have now, because we're dealing with a community that have been ignored for so long and have no one at the leadership table representing them. Okay,
so what are the gaps in services and policy that have been existing that you hope this new ministry can fix?
Well, if we take the example of housing, where Kāinga Ora now have a mandate of 15%, that's not appropriate to our community. But even the accessible housing is not often accessible to certain members of our community. So what we need is, you need disabled with lived experience who have the expertise to advise the Kāinga Ora ministry so that they can get the housing right for disabled. For education, we still have a lot of autistic children, neurodiverse children being excluded from school, children with cognitive behavioural disabilities. We need to have experts in there advising the ministry how to do it and how to do it better. So every area, health, we need representation in healthcare. Right. We need representation in just about every element.
Okay. I mean, it's hard for me to understand, obviously, but engaging with disability services literally is probably physically impossible for some people, especially if they don't have anybody to represent them. Well, at the moment we have DPOs, DPAs, and they are not representing over 70% of disabled now. What do you mean by DPOs and DPAs?
Parents of
DPOs and DPAs?
Disabled persons organisations are the DPOs, and the DPA is Disabled Persons Assembly. And a Disabled Persons Assembly is specifically led by disabled people, so that's one voice. The DPOs are predominantly led by non-disabled, with a couple of disabled leading it there. So it's mostly providers that are advising government. It's not disabled people ourselves. Right. There are some, but the majority of us have been kept out of a lot of the discussion. Okay. We've had the Enabling Good Lives program come in, where it's benefited one part of society, but it's left the majority of disabled out of it. Now that's going out nationwide. We're hopeful that provides more equity within disability around access to services and supports. But we also still have a lot of disabled excluded from any kind of support, such as fetal alcohol syndrome. They have nothing. People with physical disabilities, we're finding physical access is getting less and less, and that's a struggle. People with other forms of disabilities find there's gaps. So we need people on the ground to be able to advise and close them. But you also talk about, and you raised this point earlier, about leadership. So with this new ministry, who should be leading it? Should it be people with, say, lived experience, people who are disabled, who are taking control of this? Of course. Okay. So what does that look like? Is it one chief executive? Is it more than one chief executive? Well, putting it this way, we've got people with lived experience who have the skills now, but we also have disabled people like myself who can't work full-time because of our disabilities, but are quite capable and skilled to be able to run at a certain time frame. So you could have, say, a shared role, a shared partnership leadership, or we need to run this very differently. This is not a ministry like other ministries. There've never been a ministry like this before. So what we need to do is look at how best we can do this and get the voices of as many at the table as we can. In the meantime, though, it's going to be... That means having relationships. Sure. In the meantime, though, it's going to be hosted within the Ministry of Social Development. Some disabled people say
reported bad experience with MSD. Is that the right place for this transition to be held?
Not really, but it's happening. They've had it before with the Office for Disabilities Issues, which is a small office within MSD. I hope that as they host it, that they host it with the aim of a time frame to get it out of there and to run independently.
Is this going to be a ministry that actually has teeth and power and can provide services, or is it just going to be a figurehead ministry?
No, if it's going to be a figurehead ministry, it's a waste of time. It needs to be a ministry with enforceability, which is why really I've been pushing for an independent entity that doesn't have the government overseeing it, but is run independently like WorkSafe, where it has enforceable powers, led and run by disabled, would work better really than a ministry. But they've pushed for a ministry that's going to be happening, so we need to make it work, and it has to have enforceability to work.
Right. Should it be called Ministry for Disabled? I mean, is that the right kind of title? What should it be called?
Well, that's what it is, but I think disabled can find a name for it. I don't have a problem with it, but a lot of non-disabled parents, allies, whānau don't like it. So what we need to do is have that conversation and see what becomes a good name for it. Call it for what it is. I'm disabled. The community is disabled. That's who we are. It doesn't mean that we lack ability or that we lack value. It just means that's who we are. That represents us, and it's clear, and there's no, no ambiguity around it.
Just finally, I guess, how are you, I mean, after been fighting for 40 years to have something like this established, how are you going to measure the success?
My whole life.
Your whole life, OK. Your life's work, part of it anyway, sorry. How will you measure the success or failure of this new ministry?
On how they engage with the disability community as a whole to get it established. If they successfully do that, then they're on to a good start. If they don't engage with as many disabled as they can, then they will miss out on some valuable input that can be made. OK, Dr. Huhana Hickey, on 40 years of fighting for the new ministry, thank you very much for your time.